Hello Troglodyte Tribe and welcome back. This week we've got a really exciting guest. We've got Mark Radcliffe.
How you doing, Wesley?
I'm just a bit shocked actually. Thank you so much for coming out and having a chat.
Not at all.
So this is like an extension of the other videos to do with the recreation of the Live in Pompeii rig. So we've even got all the old microphones as well.
Amazing.
And obviously
the gong. Got to have the gong.
So what they did is they had a camera slowly zooming in from the top of the amphitheatre, and we just got a drone to fly ever so slowly in towards him. And it's so painfully slow, the zoom. When you go back and analyse the original film, it's like, wow, they weren't in a rush with any of the shots. And to make it incredibly English, instead of using we thought we'd go. Because in the original one, they got all this beautiful artwork. It's like, well, how do you
Bill and Ben?
Bill and Ben. Why not? And I think there's a kangaroo in there somewhere as well. There we go. You can't have those guys and not have that shot in.
Yeah, great.
Lovely. Shall we go and play some stuff?
Absolutely.
So we are sitting in front of some of that rig now, and Mark's come to sort of have a chat about what it is and the history of it and what it means to him and the development for music. So welcome, Mark, and what do you think of this?
Well, having grown, I'm one of the people who's old enough to have I didn't go to Pink Floyd in Pompeii. Yep. Well, no one did, there was no audience. But, I grew up seeing rigs like this and things. So it's all very nostalgic. Anyway, just seeing gear like this. But then, having known and talked to Chris, who owns it all, for quite a long time, I know his, obsessive attention to detail. So, part of me is just kind of amazed and intoxicated by being close to what is a bit of rock and roll history. And I do like that. I always think that when you see, like if you go to Sun Studios, in Memphis, and they say these are the original microphones. So Elvis might have sung into, well, he might not. But anyway, you've either got to want to embrace that or not. But just standing in a place where Elvis has definitely been and stood, you're either a person who feels that or you don't. And I very much am. And I'm also still to this day sort of impressed, but also slightly bewildered by Chris in accumulating all this stuff and like building sheds to house it and everything. I mean, I think he's sort of lost touch with reality in some ways. I mean he has a reality because he wanted to build this and he's done it, so I admire him. But it's such an obsessive, it's beyond fandom, it's a sort of madness, really. When
you got the problem of we've run out of space for the gear, you've got two choices: stop buying gear or build more sheds. Chris has definitely gone with the more. Yeah,
definitely. He'll never stop building sheds, I don't think. I mean, where will it end up? But it's an extraordinary collection of things that he's got.
Yeah, I mean, it's what it's really come to use now. So we've mentioned before is that when film companies are making films now, they can get in touch with Chris and go for that real recreation, because it's not in every cupboard you find equipment like this. He's not hiding in backs of venues in places. It's taken Chris such a long time to sort of accumulate it all.
And of course what's changed is that when people started making kind of rock and roll movies and recreating things, they say, all right, well, this is Elvis at Sun Studios or Bill Haley and the Comets, or it's the Who live at Leeds. No one had access to the footage then. No one had the internet and YouTube, and so no one knew what the backline was. Yeah. Whereas now, everybody can check it on the phone in an instant. So if they see Pink Floyd at Pompeii and the rig, and you've got a new PA system, they say, well, that's not right. And people, you don't have to be an absolute obsessive to know that it just doesn't look right. Mm-hmm. I mean, it certainly, it would. I think these things are interesting, really. I went to the Crossroads where Robert Johnson met the devil.
Wow,
I was 61 and 49, and they've got a big lamppost there with 3 guitars on it. But they've got 3 big sort of like Gretsch-looking semi-acoustic guitars, and I'm like, my immediate thing is, well, that's not the right guitar for Robert Johnson.
Not at
all. He played a Gibson L1, So I think people are much more savvy about that sort of thing these days. So the attention to detail that Chris has put into getting every detail exactly right is important.
And one of the things that Chris mentioned to me before is that when a film company asks him, can you recreate this rig? His argument is, well, yeah, but you know, nobody was taking pictures of equipment back then. Everybody's taking pictures of the tall bass player, and he's trying there with a magnifying glass, trying to see what's going on behind. So it's not been an easy job for him to actually work back. And I think through the connections he's got as well, being able to ask old roadies and old tour managers, I think that's been really helpful.
Yeah.
But I think it would be lovely if we turned it on.
It would be amazing, wouldn't it? It really would. Yeah.
I think this is your call, Chris. And the beauty of a rig like this is that you not only get the vintage look, you get the vintage hiss as well. There it is.
So this of course, this sound takes me back to being a teenager in the Free Trade Hall or whatever in Manchester, and hearing that and waiting for something to happen. Because the other thing that's changed, of course, is like if you go and see a band now, and the band's due on at 8:45. The band are on at 8:45 or 5 minutes before. Whereas in those days, you had to wait until they felt like it. You missed the last bus before Led Zeppelin came on, you know. That was one of the stories, wasn't it? Apparently they refused to come on at the Free Trade Hall, Led Zeppelin, until they'd all watched Cold Hits.
Are you joking?
Well, I don't know. You'll have to ask Robert Plant. When you recreate the Zeppelin PA, you'll have to ask Robert Plant if that's right.
That would be a nice video to make.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you said, there's something about that sound which says something's about to happen.
Yeah.
You know, you can sit there now and it's all very, very quiet, which is also nice. But there's that feeling. It's like that hiss on the start of a tape.
Yeah, it's like the visceral thrill of the vinyl record as opposed to the CD, isn't it? You know, it's just something about it that's kind of part of that oral experience we all grew up on, really.
And what Chris was telling me the other week was that this is sort of that separated out sound, whereas the old rigs used to have with a full range, so you'd have a 100-watt amp pushed into full range speakers, whereas this is sort of the introduction of the crossover.
It's only 20 watts, is it? Yeah. Yeah. That's bizarre, isn't it? You know, 20 watts and
And then we got these, obviously the 100-watt heads, which obviously just stacked on top of each other. It's the
slaves.
Yeah. And then with the height of this, I mean, like you said, it's just so imposing, isn't it? It's part of the furniture of a band. It's not something that's hidden.
So go back to kind of Spinal Tap and Stonehenge and everything, and there is something totemic about these speaker stacks. They're like standing stones, and so you think of Hawkwind, Space Ritual, and when we went as devotees, it was almost like whoever went to Stonehenge, we were coming to worship at these kind of structures, and these obelisks. And there was something totemic about them which you don't get with modern equipment. You really don't.
So we've just had a reshuffle round and we've got Chris in the shot now. So Chris, you're obviously the owner of this amazing rig. So do you want to just tell me and Mark a bit more about what this rig is?
I'm just intrigued how many actual pieces of the system are involved in recreating the Pompeii rig.
There's a dozen cabs on the back line, and then there's probably about 40 cabs on the PA.
And then all your slave amps.
And then 40 slave amps, yeah.
So it's over 100 pieces of kit.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, why? I know why, because you've done it and you've recreated it, and it's amazing. Is it a long-held dream, or how did it start? Did you just buy an old speaker and one thing led to another? And before you know it, it had got out of hand and you got 40 sheds.
When I worked for Tractor, when Tractor signed with Peely, and he said, I can give you an advance, or we get really good discounts through Clive Selwood, had really good contacts with equipment companies. He said, so we can buy you, we can send you an advance for your first few albums, or you can have a load of gear at trade price, which is a much better deal. So Tractor were one of the first people in the Northwest with a stereo PA. We actually had a stereo mixer and slaves and columns and expand and AKG mics and recording gear back in 71, 72. And as that system grew, which eventually became the Deeply Vale system and then the Alexandra Park Rock Against Racism system and so on and so forth, as that system grew, one day in 1973, our studios were by the Dressers hippie pub in Hewitt, and there was a car park for Salford Electrical Instruments where one of the future directors of Wigwam worked. Anyway, on a Sunday afternoon I decided to get a hire van, which was a Mark 1 Transit, but it was a Luton version of that, put it on the car park and recreate the Ummagumma Biggin Hill picture.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I thought, oh, I'd really like to do that with all our gear.
Right.
The caretaker rushed out. I mean, with no power.
Right.
We could have run some from the studio across the road, but it would have meant running a mains cable across a bus route, which is probably not too good a thing to do.
I wouldn't put it past you, but yeah, I'll take your point.
So 1973 was the first time I did that, was to try and do the Ummagumma picture. And then when I'd done the Ummagumma picture, which we're going to edit into the film at some point, aren't we? Then a couple of years later, I built another PA, an even bigger one, and I did a picture of that with a Mark 1 Transit behind it, just like that. And that was the year that I toured with. That was 77, so Lemmy used that PA, and the Lurkers, and the Adverts, and the Dickies, and loads of people, because I did all the northern dates for those sort of bands. So again, I did another picture like that. So I suppose it was in the back of my mind,
right? Yeah.
You know. And then I got offered the 5 Pink Floyd Audio Masters and a few speakers, and I thought I'll have to buy them. So I bought sort of 5 of those, sold one back to Floyd, and then I got offered the 3 Isle of Wight Audio Masters. Then I got offered David Bowie's Audio Master. Then I got offered.
Who offers you these things? Where do they come from? Where is this stuff hiding?
In people's attics. And
but which people? People who were roadies? People who were part of the crew?
Some very
people
rarely.
Who thieved them from gigs. I mean, which people?
No, just people that have bought them and have known it tends to be people that have bought them out of shops when they've been traded in.
Right.
So and then they've sat. So I got to the point where now I actually have 31 of these Audio Masters, including one that Dave Stewart and Annie Lennox used to rehearse early Eurythmic stuff, and you know, so it just goes on and on and on. Got one that belonged to Cactus, so you know, it's never ending really. And then obviously, having done the Morrissey film, the Bohemian Rhapsody film, the Elton John film, and now the forthcoming Pistols TV series, it's just biopics and history of music are just happening now, aren't they?
Yeah, they are very much so, yeah.
My theory being, and I'm sure you're probably in agreement, that some of the best albums were in like a 12 to 13 year span, and everything else is just repeated and regurgitated.
Well, I think it's that's an interesting theory. That I think that we are whatever age you are, whatever age you were born in. I think that we have a window age between maybe about 13 and 17, where the music you hear in that window affects you profoundly for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And so even records, you know, I was talking about this the other day when someone said, oh, you know, music's not as good as it used to be. I said, I think you've got to be very careful saying that. You know, it's like, I mean, for example, I know it's not recent, but like, I'm not the world's biggest Oasis fan, you know, I think they're fine. But actually...
I watched Liam the other night and I was entertained.
Well, but when you hear those songs, you know, his ear Don't Look Back in Anger and Wonderwall, and I remember being at Main Road when they were on.
Well,
you know.
I went to Nebworth as well.
Right. So... you know, those songs were the soundtrack to those kids' youth.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were their big hymns, you know? And so I think it's not for me to judge a lot of music, and certainly a lot of rap music and stuff that's come more recent. I mean, you know, I think that we all have that. It's just so happens that the Floyd and the Bowies and things, that was when I was in my early teens.
Yeah.
And it still sounds amazing to me. And I think it is amazing music. And I think I was lucky to be born when I was born.
What's interesting is that the size and scale of this kind of equipment. I mean, when we used to look at bands back in these days, this was part of the furniture. This was part of the scene that you would walk into visually. And I think it's something that you mentioned earlier. It's like it's something that triggers off a memory from your youth. Whereas PAs now are specifically designed to be as hidden away as possible, but there was never really an opportunity.
I think it's very different now, isn't it? I think that a lot changed. Like if you look at Glastonbury and who headlines Glastonbury. If you look at the film of Bowie headlining Glastonbury, which some people say is the greatest headline set ever. You know, I'm a big Bowie fan. I don't know whether that's true or not. It's certainly a good set list. But if you look at the setting of the band, it's like David Bowie walks on, and the band had just stood around him with a few amps and everything. And if you compare that to like when Beyonce headlined Glastonbury, as you say, the speakers were, it's like a theatre speaker system hidden, because you put in the full Vegas production. That's now what you need to headline a major festival in the 21st century. Back then, as we're talking, what you needed was loads of equipment, or else people wouldn't have it. No one was interested in making speakers smaller. It was how big could you make them? You know,
but also
look at the colours of it as well.
I know that. You know, yeah.
There's also got to be some roadies out there who are slightly grateful that it got a bit lighter as well.
Must have been. And can you imagine building that and shifting it every night? Really, but I suppose. I mean, maybe people took less of other stuff in. You know, some bands took a lot of lights and things. Floyd may well have been one of them. You know, but a lot of bands, the light shows would have been pretty basic compared to now. The lights is sort of quite rightly seen as important as the sound, isn't it? It's the whole kind of visual and oral picture you've got to get right. Whereas back then, if the sound was all right and if the sound was impressive and loads of speakers and there were a couple of lights so you could see what people were doing, that was what mattered, really.
I mean, you look at things like Cream at the Albert Hall, it's kind of house lights are on
and, you look at,
and the PA's on, and there you go, you've got a concert.
And you look at those big festivals and things like now, it looks bizarre because you look at these old festivals and you think, where's the big screen? I can't see anything. And of course, people were half a mile away at the Isle of Wight, up on Desolation Row. You couldn't see anything. You just there was a sort of beauty in that, though, really. That you weren't trying to look and observe minutely. And I think that's one of the things actually Floyd were very clever about quite early on, is realising that if you wanted to do a big event, it wasn't all about them being pop stars. In fact, it wasn't about them at all. They were sort of providing a soundtrack for a bigger picture. And I remember seeing Floyd at Main Road, you know, and every time a train went past on the embankment or a plane went overhead, it was almost as if they'd arranged it, you know. There was one moment during that concert when I saw Floyd at Main Road, and it was predicted that the Skylab, the space station, was due to go over. And it didn't seem implausible that Dave Gilmour had organised that to happen. You know, everything that was going on around you seemed part of the show, and so that's why I think something like Pompeii is very important, really, isn't it? Because I think it does sort of project the idea of a band of sort of playing this soundtrack as part of a landscape and painting a really big picture. It was rough and ready. You know, it still makes me laugh when I see pictures of old rock and roll concerts, you know, and the singer will have like 2 or 3 microphones taped together because it's going to 3 different amps to make it loud enough, you know. And so, you know, every big system, no matter how big, there was still an element of lash up to it, wasn't it? And I know what you're saying, because, you know, if you look at another area where big speaker systems have been, you know, an important part of it, you look at and you'll remember this from the punk days, the reggae sound systems, you know, which were very distinctively, the sound of different sound systems, they varied a lot, and the way that someone had personally put that collection of speakers together was very important. Whereas now, you'll just get an industry standard, and it will sound right, which is good at the end of the day. But
so one thing I've really noticed about this system, and I've played it to a few different sound engineers that I know from the recordings that we took, is that it's actually the impurities and the mild distortion within it is the beautiful characteristic of it that we're now spending a lot of money on plugins to recreate. So it's actually the fact that it's not perfect. It's the fact that
analog transistor distortion.
But a lot of the great moments in rock and roll and in all kinds of artistic creation have really been accidents. You know, I mean, Brian Eno has that great phrase of honour thy mistake as a hidden intention. So the idea, it wasn't what I planned to do, but actually what I finished up doing was that better than what I planned to do. And like if you look at something like Jackie Brenston and the Delta Cats, which is like the first, Rocket 66, the first rock and roll record, that guitar sound came about because they dropped the amplifier on the road on the way there. They knackered the amplifier, but they didn't have those were the days an amplifier was probably a year's wages, so they didn't have an option of another amplifier, so they played it through and it was distorted, and they said, oh well, it'd probably do, and it sort of invents the whole thing, and it's an accident. And so you're right, are you trying to create perfection? And you're not.
No.
That's why people like the vinyl, like we talked about it, the imperfection in the sound.
That hiss at the beginning, all those little bits add to that overall feel of it.
They just do.
And it's this mild distortion that just, it's ever so subtle, but it just suddenly takes you like to a period, because it was all that sound in that period.
Is there something psychological, do we think, about those distortions? Like the actual idea of distortion, when you think about it, is overloading the system, isn't it? It's actually if we talk about taking it to the limit, man, that's what you're doing. You're taking the sound actually further than the equipment was designed to do, beyond the 11. And so that perhaps is kind of part of the excitement of that rock and roll sound. It's pushing it. Yeah.
I mean, it's like you film on a perfectly good colour camera, high definition, and then you go and buy a program to turn it into black and white with scratches on. So you are trying to go back and recreate that whole.
You can have the best of both worlds, though, can't you? Because I mean, even what you're saying, which sounds ludicrous, but the idea you can just you don't need a load of camera equipment at a gig. I mean, one of the things that you can do it on your phone, and then you can recreate that. One of the things I really regret is that, like, all the gigs I was talking about, the sort of teenage years, all those gigs I went to, all the punk gigs.
Didn't take a cine camera and a cassette recorder.
No one took anything because it was expensive, big, bulky equipment, and then you'd have to go down to Boots to get it developed, and most of them were terrible. Someone would have nicked your camera anyway, so you'd have fallen over after a few pints and smashed the lens. No, so I didn't have any photos. We didn't have any. We didn't have any, and I wish we had. So I wish there had been a phone I could have taken it on and then gone back and made it scratchy. So
all those Johnny Quincy gigs you could have photographed.
But that's, I mean, that's a tour I did, a sort of a chaotic tour of Europe. But
with Shabby Tigers PA.
With Shabby Tigers PA. But I do wish I had a record of those things now, but it just wasn't an option.
No.
It just wasn't an option.
What I'd really like to hear at some point is some folk through this.
Yeah.
Because the folks were playing through systems like this, and it has that natural distortion as well. So does it add that extra layer of energy that is different now? Because you wouldn't necessarily, when you're recording folk, added layers of distortion on it now.
Well, you see, I mean, there's a famous photo, you can find the photos of Steel Eye Span.
Yeah.
And Maddie Pryor's in it, Martin Carthy's in it, I think. Who else would be in it? Anyway, and all of them are playing through massive Fender stacks.
Right.
All of them. And they've no drummer.
Yeah.
And Maddie Pryor said you could never hear no one ever heard the vocals, which is bad. But they were a folk group, and they were hauling around a full backline. And these are the ones that are shoulder high, the big
showman,
all that.
So the studio sound would have been so different to the live sound, whereas now we do try and the live sound is usually trying to replicate a lot of what we've achieved in the studio, whereas back then, the folk scene would have had much more of aggressive live sound, I'd imagine, because of the
guy who did the Zeppelin WEM system, prior to going to do Zeppelin, he was actually doing with WEM the Incredible String Band and Fairport. And he was talking about doing the Incredible String Band and Fairport at Albert Hall. And I read in Richard Thompson's book that he said the WEM system was just like Lego. He said you went to play a bigger place, so you had to get more bricks and add on to it. I mean, it was all there was. And in the early days, there was. You've got to think that at Pompeii there were no wedge monitors. Monitors hadn't been invented. So bands, you couldn't hear the vocals. Even the band couldn't hear the vocals because there were no monitors.
Well, strange enough, we had this situation when the band were here the other week, and we ended up having to twist one of the cabs towards so they could hear themselves,
which is presumably how monitors started. So hang on a minute, instead of half turning that, why don't we put why don't we get something just for that then, instead of it being back?
So we were literally turning PA back on.
Charlie Watkins had a 1x12 which he was using to feed some sound through for him to listen, and Roger Chapman grabbed hold of it and put it, because how Roger Chapman used to do all this and sweated a lot, so he had a load of towels. So he leaned this cab on some towels, and within about 2 months the wedge monitor came, with an angled front pointing up at the vocalist.
It seems so obvious now, doesn't it, really, And now you've got people like people with in-ear monitors, even if they're playing in the back room of a pub, haven't you?
Yeah.
You know, and everything, you know.
It's interesting that the amount of power we had through this rig, pointing forwards, and the same as the Isle of Wight, is actually less than what you'd have pointing back at a stage now. Well, thank you very much for joining us this week at Troglodyte Music, and thank you very much to our amazing guests.
It's been great. It's been great. What a beautiful day.
Yeah.
What a it's like being in Pompeii.
Yeah, it is.
And yeah, well, how do you top that? Catch you soon. Bye bye.
Great.